The years of fiscal rectitude and political brawls about debt and deficits all became a little academic in the wake of the global financial crisis and the COVID pandemic. They produced astronomical surges in spending to prop up the economy. Forecasts of the deficit don't necessarily tell you how well the government may have been managing the budget. That's something to keep in mind when you hear talk of deficits as far as the eye can see in relation to tomorrow night's budget. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't try to assess how well the government has been managing the budget. Treasurer Jim Chalmers and Finance Minister Katie Gallagher have made much of their spending cuts.
Demonstrated in this budget, $22 billion in savings. Spending restraint which would be unrecognisable by the standards of recent history.
The spending hasn't really been all that restrained. Yes, they have found savings by, as they like to say, reprioritisation and so forth, but they've spent all of those and a bit more. They have, as they like to say, banked around 4/5 of the windfall revenue gains they've received from commodity prices being higher than expected. They haven't really tackled the structural budget problems that have bedevilled Australia. There's a lot more work that will need to be done if the aim that both parties claim to have of putting Australia's budget back into at least a structural balance, if not a surplus, over the medium term.
During the term of the Albanese government, spending as a proportion of the economy has gone from a low of 24.4%, lower than the average pre-COVID levels of the Abbott, Turnbull and Morrison governments, to a forecast peak of 27.2% in 2025-26, the highest level since the early 1980s. Tax as a proportion of the economy is forecast to be 23.4% in the current financial year, in line with but lower than the later years of the Howard government. Economist Saul Eslake points out that there are three reasons why government spending is now considerably higher and likely to stay that way. More spending on health, age and disability, more spending on defence, and because all that recent debt since the GFC and COVID has added to our national interest bill, which raises some bigger questions hanging over the outlook for the budget. These new spending pressures in areas like defence, which will lift the overall expenses facing governments, mean Australians have to confront the fact that more taxes will be needed to pay for them. The time when good budget management was just measured in terms of spending cuts is past.
What ideally we should be having is what some people call an adult conversation between both the government and the opposition and the electorate as to what are the fairest and least economically damaging ways of raising the revenue required for the additional spending that the public either wants or which it's going to get whether they want it or not. We're not having that conversation. We're not getting it from the government and we're not getting it from the coalition opposition.
As to the question of how the government has managed the economy,
I think they deserve more credit than they've been given for getting inflation down from an intolerably high level of over 8% at its peak to a level which, though still higher than we want it to be, is tolerably low enough for the Reserve Bank to have begun lowering interest rates without causing a recession and without causing a big increase in unemployment.
It's hard to think of a budget about which such low expectations have been set by the government of the day. That's partly because no one expected that there would actually be a budget. So many of its planned announcements have already been made.